My name is Jaris Swidrovich. Jaris like Paris, but with a hard J. My last name Swidrovich is from my Ukrainian side, so my dad is 100% Ukrainian. And on my mother's side, we are Saulteaux. So I'm a member of Yellowquill First Nation, which is on Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan and the Métis homelands. But most of my life has been spent in Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon. I'm a pharmacist and currently assistant professor in the teaching stream at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy at the University of Toronto. But prior to these last 2 years at the University of Toronto, I was a faculty member at the University of Saskatchewan in the College of Pharmacy and Nutrition for a period of 6 years. Prior to that, and even throughout that time, and even currently, I engage in clinical practice as well, primarily in the areas of HIV, pain, substance use, mental health, and Indigenous people's health in general. I'm a two-spirit person. I am a queer person. I live with a non-visible disability. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, and also engage in the spaces of equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, anti-oppression. And within the Saskatchewan NEIHR, so I'm one of the principal investigators and co-scientific director of our First Nations arm of the Saskatchewan NEIHR. I started pharmacy school in 2006 through 2010 was my Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy, and then did a post-baccalaureate Doctor of Pharmacy at the University of Toronto in 2011 to 13. During all of that time, I was looking for an Indigenous association in pharmacy. I felt quite isolated throughout my pharmacy learning and also being a pharmacist. I felt like no matter where I was, whether that was on our CAPC National Council, which is the Canadian Association for Pharmacy Students and Interns, or local pharmacy councils, Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists. I was the president of the Saskatchewan branch. And involved in many other spaces within pharmacy practice. And in all of the spaces I was part of, I was the only one. I knew that there were other Indigenous pharmacy professionals out there. I just didn't know who they were or how to connect with them. And in my PhD in education, which I'm just finishing up this summer of 2023, I studied Indigenous people's experiences with pharmacy education in Canada. And every single participant in my study said the same thing. In fact, isolation is one of the chapters of my dissertation because that was the biggest theme across all Indigenous pharmacy professionals who participated. So everybody, including myself, agreed that we needed some type of home base. We wanted a home base to build community within the pharmacy discipline. We wanted to ensure there was a space in place for Indigenous ways of knowing, thinking, being, and doing to come together with Western medicine and Western practices. And we also wanted prospective and even current Indigenous pharmacy students in pharmacy programs, pharmacy assistant programs, and pharmacy technician programs across the country to see themselves reflected in the discipline of pharmacy. I just had a meeting last night, actually. It was our very first AGM for the Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada. And we did a bit of a round table, and every single person said, geez, I wish I had this around when I was thinking about pharmacy and certainly throughout pharmacy school. So we're only 1 year young so far, and so much work to do in this space. We have a CEO, Amy Lamb, and a COO, Chief Operations Officer, Jazina Bear, and then a board of 12 people consisting of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and also pharmacy assistants in our circle of membership. We have a lot on the road, as I mentioned, a lot to come, and we've been connected with virtually, it seems like and feels like every pharmacy association in Canada, whether regulatory or advocacy, provincial or national. And I'm just so thankful for that. People are truly engaged in truth and reconciliation in pharmacy, and I think that our new organization will be a major conduit for us to achieve those calls to action within the pharmacy discipline. Being an Indigenous pharmacist and academic Some of the work that I put together in my research and the way that I present my work and research is slightly different at times anyway than everyone else in my discipline. So when we look at peer-reviewed literature and having my work published in peer-reviewed journals, I kind of feel like I don't have any peers who are Indigenous pharmacists and academics being the ones to review my manuscript submissions. And I had a little bit of trouble trying to find a place that would take what I had to offer. So I had a discussion with the editor of the Canadian Pharmacists Journal and shared this reality with him. And he was very quick to offer a solution of, let's publish this work, let's publish your work in the Canadian Pharmacists Journal, and let's make it a series. So I talked to him about tensions between Indigenous worldview and Western worldview in the context of pharmacy education and practice. And I had a lot to say about that. So we came up with the conclusion that let's spread this out over a 3-part series and introduce it with a joint editorial. So that joint editorial is out and published already. And then the next 3 issues will have part 1, part 2, and then part 3, respectively, of this series. So that whole series, as I mentioned, highlights tensions between Indigenous and Western worldview in pharmacy education and practice. And I'm just so excited for that to be out there. And although, of course, it's within the pharmacy discipline, I think that it will be applicable to anyone in a health-related profession. I'll consider that as like Indigenous work within pharmacy in general, I guess. And although I knew there were Indigenous pharmacists before me, like I said, I didn't know who they were or where they were. And I've never had an Indigenous professor in pharmacy anyway. And actually, I think not in any subject matter either for my pre-pharmacy studies. I couldn't see myself reflected in this profession. I just found my own tensions between my Indigenous worldview and the worldview that is taught, learned, and practiced in pharmacy, and just felt a strong sense of responsibility to make space and even in some ways take space within the pharmacy discipline for Indigenous peoples, not just for Indigenous folks within the profession, but to engage all people within the profession who will then be working with Indigenous patients, families, and communities. We know that Indigenous peoples in Canada experience poorer health outcomes than all other like non-Indigenous peoples in this country. And pharmacists are the most accessible health professionals of any kind. And you just can't access any other health professional in the same way that you can access pharmacists. And there's statistics out there about how over a dozen times you'll see your pharmacist per year, the average person anyway, whereas approximately 1 time you'll see your family physician per year. So people interact with us frequently. We're visible, we're accessible, we're trusted, often ranked number 1 or even 2 of the most trusted professionals of any kind. So I hope that with that positionality of pharmacists that we have such a tremendous opportunity to make an impactful difference. But what I also say to folks is that given that positionality, we have a tremendous opportunity to not do a good job and to create harm or recreate harm. So we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for Indigenous peoples, with Indigenous peoples, and of course for everybody else. So I felt like I had some responsibility there. And for me, that meant getting more education than my bachelor in pharmacy. So doing the Doctor of Pharmacy program and a PhD in education, because I feel like, as Senator Murray Sinclair has said, that education is what got us into this mess and education will be the way out. So I think that with the credentials and learning and experiences I've had along the way, that I can contribute to some of these positive changes in my profession. It's impacted me in all of the ways, in ways of such incredible joy and feeling just inspired by the work, not the work that I do, but the people who I'm doing the work with. And it's just been an incredible journey. It's also been very challenging, and I won't shy away from that. When you're the only one in various spaces, and again, I acknowledge there's plenty of Indigenous pharmacists out there, still not enough, but in all of the spaces that I've been in, my workplaces and academic circles, I have been the only one. And when folks want Indigenous education from you, or they want to learn about truth and reconciliation or anti-racism, anti-oppression, and that responsibility falls on you as the only one, we often get labeled with a bunch of different labels, things like, being difficult or being a complainer. I've heard things like, Jaris, you get offended by everything, or not everybody's racist, and I totally understand that. It's just that my scholarly work is so closely linked to my identity and my spirit and my purpose on this earth in general, versus if I was focusing on cardiology, let's say, and specializing in anticoagulation, or not forming blood clots. I could passionately speak about a topic like that. I wouldn't be making anybody feel like I'm assuming that they're racist. If they criticize the field of cardiology, it's not hurting me. It's not hurting my spirit. It doesn't feel like a direct attack on me or my family. But because I'm teaching and working with and engaging in Indigenous content, it is so entirely personal that it can be a big challenge. And I've certainly had times of feeling like maybe this isn't for me, because it's so much, it's a lot on my shoulders, and just hits you in a different way than just an interest area in clinical practice. But I've been reminded by folks like my mother and many others that so many people, the 7 generations before me, they've made far more sacrifices and dealt with a lot more probably than I have, in order for someone like me to even be in the spaces that I'm in. So I need to do my part in acknowledging where I'm at in the grand scheme of things, in the universe, thinking about the next 7 generations to come. So as difficult as things can be, and as much as it has impacted me in even negative ways, I feel very responsible. And then I'm inspired right after that to know that people, the next 7 generations after me, will hopefully have a better experience in the pharmacy discipline. But like I said, it hasn't all been negative or challenging like that. It's just been really, really rewarding, particularly forming this new Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada. I just can't even describe the emotions that go on in my head and my body and spirit when we have meetings together. I've never worn my Indigenous and pharmacist hat at the same time with other people who are wearing both of those hats at the same time. I felt like when I'm wearing my Indigenous hat, that's the only hat I'm wearing, or when I'm wearing my pharmacist hat, that's the only hat I'm wearing. Or if I'm wearing them both, I'm the only one wearing them both. So it just feels so wonderfully inclusive now. And we've got this new entity for people to be impacted in positive ways as well. And I hope that the positive side will be the biggest impacts for Indigenous pharmacy folks to come. So there certainly have been a number of challenges, and it's reached me at a very personal and professional level, and even has seeped into my relationships with friends, partners, family members. Because this work is so new, I would say, in my discipline, it hasn't always been received well. Many folks are very welcoming of this work. Some are welcoming of it, but take offense to it, and perhaps feel like the focus is being pulled away from whatever their interest area might be. And then I have to remind people, right, that we live on stolen land in Canada, and whose land is this? And the people who are experiencing the worst health outcomes are the people whose land we're all on. So in my point of view, a decolonized and Indigenous and reconciliation type of approach should be at the complete forefront of our mind. And so I think that ideology or perception of importance or the imperativeness of the topic areas runs into a clash with other folks. Sometimes I know that other folks have been well-meaning and kind-hearted and have wanted to say or do the right things, but sometimes they don't, and that can be really hurtful. And it's hard to let people know that they just hurt you, or for me to actually say what you just said to me was incredibly racist, right? That's a really difficult thing to do to a colleague, or particularly to someone who's a superior of yours, or to other people who are peer reviewing your work or determining if you will get promotion, tenure, merit every year, right? So there's that constant struggle of like, how honest can I be, or how honest should I be about what's going on, while still trying to protect myself. So you have to find that balance between self and community, and, why am I here? And so I think that sometimes I balanced why I'm here being for community in such a big way that it ended up hurting me in a big way, and even led to my resignation from a previous tenure track position. I just couldn't handle that anymore for a variety of reasons. But so there certainly has been challenges. The academic side of like being a student throughout my post-secondary career was much different. I didn't openly express my indigeneity, as do many other Indigenous folks in the pharmacy field, for a variety of reasons. So I didn't have to engage in those contentious spaces and places and topics and confrontations, for example, and got to be, just a pharmacy student for the most part. So that educational period moved a little bit smoother than my employment period as in the professor stream as an assistant professor. So lots of challenges, but I feel like I have overcome all of them. I'm still here, I'm still going, and this is now the 8th year as a faculty member in this profession. And I'm just inspired by and thrilled to know all of the things that will still be happening. I'm 36 years old, and to think if I retire at 66-ish, that's still another 30 years, right? So much more to do in that time, and I can't wait to recruit Indigenous graduate students and undergraduate students in pharmacy and work with them too, and just continue to build this community so that those tremendous challenges I had won't need to be experienced by other people, or at least not to the same magnitude. Do it. Do it. Oh my goodness, there is so much opportunity within the pharmacy profession. There are pharmacy assistant programs, pharmacy technician programs, and what's called PharmD, and that's the program that you go through to become a pharmacist. And once you are one of those various pharmacy professionals, there are so many places for you to work. I think that people tend to focus on the community pharmacy type of environment, like a Shoppers Drug Mart, Rexall type of setting. Next, people might focus on a hospital environment where you're on the wards working with physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, dietitians, etc. Both technicians, assistants, and pharmacists as well can work in those capacities. But then there's also consultative services. There are privately owned entrepreneurial opportunities, government opportunities, policy making, leading various non-for-profit organizations, advocacy organizations. I recently heard about someone whose job was to accredit pharmacies or pharmacy related spaces on like military bases and like submarine ships. And there's just so much opportunity that when you choose pharmacy, you're not simply choosing one particular job. You're opening the door to so many other opportunities. I will also honestly share with all of the groups of folks and the identities that you mentioned, that things won't always be easy. And I think that prior to even entering pharmacy, people will have already known that themselves if they are Indigenous or trans or queer, for example, or two-spirit. They will have already recognized that. However, I think that we're at a very different place in time right now. I completely realize that, gender diverse and sexually diverse and Indigenous folks are still very much oppressed in many ways, but it's not as extensive as it was last year, the year prior, 10 years ago, kind of thing. So we have a big community of people who share those same identities and multiple of those identities at the same time within the pharmacy profession, within grad school, and within all post-secondary studies. Even if you don't choose pharmacy, I think that the world of opportunity that opens up to you is so huge with a post-secondary education, whether that's university, college, or some other post-secondary program, that it's pretty hard to say no to in my mind. I do appreciate, though, having said that, that people live with various life complexities where that might not be an option, and I completely appreciate that. But if post-secondary of some kind is an opportunity for a person, I would strongly consider that. Seek out all scholarship and bursary applications. There's a lot of assistance out there for Indigenous and even like queer, two-spirit, trans students as well. And connect with me, right? I'm still in this journey myself and will be for a long time. So I'm happy to connect with folks at any time and talk about anything you might want to as it relates to post-secondary, grad school, or the pharmacy profession. Lots of other faculty, students, and especially community partners being engaged in the work that I do. With respect to creating the Indigenous Pharmacy Professionals of Canada, I think about the wonderful and kind assistance from the Canadian Pharmacists Association and each of the individuals within that organization who helped us get off the ground. I'm so appreciative, as well as the Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists have helped us make some waves in our profession and introduced us to some other key players in the pharmacy profession. I've absolutely worked with other faculty on the work that I do, and most of the other faculty folks who I work with have not been within pharmacy. It's been interprofessional. So working with people on our Saskatchewan NEIHR team, for example, in Indigenous studies, kinesiology, nursing, medicine, physical therapy, and other professionals within those disciplines too, not just academics. And then the community partners, so many community partners, whether they're community-based organizations, people with lived and living experience or expertise, and just patients, families, communities, being part of the design of research, the design of what we teach in the classroom, helping to deliver the research and what we teach in the classroom, evaluating what we do, setting up new protocols for what we do. I just really love the co-creation atmosphere that exists within the academic setting with other faculty, students, and community partners.